All right. So today we're going to be looking at React router. Um, so there's a README here, which you can go through, and it's also based on the official tutorial. So we're going to be using a third-party library called React Router DOM, which is right here. So here's the documentation for this, and as is often the case with React, things change very rapidly. So there's a big, there have been a couple, like in the last year and a half, a couple big changes to React Router. So just be aware of that when you're looking at documentation. You'll see some different. So version 5, version 6.4, also like pre 6.4 is another kind of marker. But anyway, so we're going to use a third-party library, this React router, and this is basically going to allow us to imitate a classical web experience. So in the let's say in the good old days, what you would do is you would go to example.com and you type example.com in your browser. Your browser sends an HTTP request to whatever server is connected to that DNS address. So first, you type in example.com. That request goes to a DNS server, which looks up example.com against a table of IP addresses. And then you get that IP address, and that request goes to that IP address. That server will take in that HTTP request, parse it, and say, okay, you want to make a GET request to example.com/nothing. Okay, I'm going to return you an HTML document. You get that HTML document. That HTML document has, a link in it. It has a link in it to example.com/contacts. So you click on contact, and then you make another request to that same server, except this time the HTTP request has /contact. So the server will say, oh, you want to go to /contact? I'm going to grab that file from /contact. I'm going to grab that HTML document from /contact, and I'm going to send you a new HTML document. So the classical flow is every time you go to a new URI, it's basically a file system, right? You're saying, give me the HTML document in this file path. But with React and more modern web servers, we don't want to be asking for an entirely new document every time we're doing that, because it's basically just not as efficient, right? Your network requests take a long time. They're not the most reliable. So you're just introducing a lot of time and inefficiency and unknown stuff into that system. So what React does basically is makes everything a single page app. And there are variations on this, but that's the basic idea. So you get one dump of HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And then from there, everything you do is just happening in your browser. So everything you make that initial request, and everything else that's happening is happening through processing in the browser. You're not making new requests to get new HTML documents. But people, like and expect that experience, that UI, that API of I go to example.com/users. And so React Router will basically provide that experience without actually requesting a new HTML document. So the short summary is that React Router fakes that older system. So that's the basic idea here. All right, so how do we use it? So So this, I'll let you go through this README as an exercise. Actually, 134. I'll let you go through this README as an exercise, like after the lecture. What I'm going to show you for the lecture is what I think is basically the simplest possible way to use this. All right, so to do that, I'm going to create a React app. So npm create, what's the command? Beat at latest. React and JavaScript. npm install. Any questions about what I just said? Okay, so I've got the default project going here. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to install React Router DOM. So if I go to the official documentation, let's see. We don't really have a new, let's see, they tell you how to install it. That's crazy. There you go. So yeah, the docs could be better for this part, but so you run npm install React Router DOM to actually install it. Okay, cool. So now I can look at my package.json and I see there's the dependencies, React DOM, and then this is the one we just installed, React Router DOM. Okay. Now I'm going to go to the source, and what we've done before is we have a component, and then we have lots of other components, and then this component can render this other one, and so on. And everything is all kind of on one route in one page. We're going to do something similar, but we're just going to set it up a little differently. So I think we can create some kind of dummy page. So we'll have a nav bar and then a couple like pages that people can go to. So I'm going to create a nav bar component first. So I'll create a components. And then I will have a function. I'll do the export default. And I'm very lazy, so I'm gonna look up navbar. Actually, I'm gonna use CSS. So
Hey Chad, when you talked about the router like stores like everything it needs like around the browser instead of like going back and forth like to each endpoint every time you request something,
yeah.
is that caching, or is that like just something else completely?
No, it's all actually just happening like in your browser. So it's the same thing. Under the hood, it's the same thing that you've been doing before with React, where you just like will click on something and that changes the state, and then React updates the DOM.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
that's all that's happening. Instead of like every time the page changes, I make a new request to the server and get a new page and get a new HTML document. It's all just happening on your browser.
Okay.
You still make network requests. Like if you click on, if you have to fetch something from an API somewhere, you're still making network requests for, for information like that, but you're not getting new HTML documents every time you go to a new page.
Okay.
Okay. I have a quick question about the routes. It may sort of not be related. I hope I'm not going on a tangent. But in Django, there were there's something called routes as well, right? Like where you can create like a direct route and not like use views to access like your API endpoint.
I think there's like a default router thing. It's one of those magic.
It's not related, is it?
No. Okay. So if this is what I think you're saying, the default router, it's one of those like Django magic things where it will basically creates all of the URL routes.
Yes.
By
yes.
default. Yeah. So that's a little different because those are real routes.
Thank you.
This feels more like Django, like templates, right? Like you can go to a specific HTML file in Django, and I feel like this is more like that. Like you can navigate through a page instead of having to go to a different HTML file. But that's the whole thing about React. There's just one HTML, right?
Yeah. So if we don't teach Django full stack anymore, but Django full stack is that older system where you have a bunch of different HTML documents, right, for each page. And then you would serve up, so there's a template. So what happens is like on the server side, you make a request with some information or whatever. That information gets injected into an HTML template, but then what you actually get as the client is an HTML document. So every time you go to a different page, you get a new HTML document.
And here the idea is that there's just one HTML.
Yeah.
And then you're just going on a inception of a bunch of functions. And they call each other, and the router is more like, you have a nav bar. So in your screen it says Sass components, JavaScript. So then there's gonna be like, if you go to Sass, it's gonna be like home/Sass, so and so, and those are the routes that you put, like kind of like how it works.
What happened? We'll see it in a sec. What happens is your route is actually just going to be a way to render a different component. That's all that's going to happen. Is it's just like it's going to say, oh, you're at this URL or whatever. I'm just going to render this new component for you. So it's not actually making a new request to the server at that route. It's just going to render a different component. Okay, so I'm going to steal this nav bar from Material. So Materialize is one of those. There are a number of like, CSS libraries. I think this one is owned by Google. Not sure. Okay. All right, so a couple things. I'm just like copy pasting HTML. This won't quite work. Does anyone know what the problem here with class is?
Class name, because it's JSX.
Yeah, exactly. So we have to make that change. All right, and then to actually use this,
you misspelled class name on the second one.
oh, thank you. So to use this, I have to go actually load this stuff. Let's see. So I can do this. So this will basically download a CSS file that I can then use. So to use that, so we have all this fancy React stuff, but at the end of the day, it's just going to end up as HTML. So we can use regular HTML stuff with it. And so we can add that here in the head. can add this new script tag and link. All right, so I've got my CSS library available to me now. And I have this component here, which should render that. So now I'm going to go to nav. I'm going to go here and I'm going to render the nav component. It will automatically import that. Yes. Get rid of this. And I'm going to run it. Okay, so that doesn't, there's some conflicts there, I think, with the pre-existing CSS. So I'm just gonna get rid of that for now. And I'll also, let's see. Okay, so that's fine for now. So I'm basically just getting rid of all of the default CSS. So great job, me. I have it. Oh, that was strange. Okay. There's also some caching that can happen here. So I'm not sure what that width was, but okay. So we have a nav bar, so we can use this as a starting point. So what we're basically going to do is now when we click on one of these links, instead of going like here, it's already programmed to go to sas.html. So in a classical, web design, this would actually make a new request to this server. Well, a new request to that server. I don't know what I'm doing here. And get this new document, this new HTML document, which would then render in the browser. But we're not going to actually make those requests. All right. Okay. So the nav bar will render, and I'm going to go into the nav bar, and we'll end up making a couple changes here. So we're not going to use this A tag stuff anymore. We're going to use React router. So this A tag actually is a link. It's actually a link to somewhere else. So we don't want to actually link somewhere else. We want to kind of intercept that and just make a component change. All right, so I've got the nav bar, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go create all of my routes. So if this were Django, we would have our URLs file with all the different endpoints, and then we would say if you go to this endpoint, call this view function. And we're going to do something similar to that. So first off, I'm going to import this will be React hash router. Yep. So if you look at the docs, there's a whole bunch of variations on this stuff. I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible. So here's like a basic example that we're going to follow here. So we have some kind of router, which is basically just going to wrap around anything that you want to use the routes. So that could be your entire app. It could be some subpart of it. It's kind of up to you, but usually you'll put this like at the top level, and then you'll have routes. You have this other inner component, which is routes, and then each individual route will be its own component, and you basically will choose the the URI that you want, slash nothing, slash contacts, slash users, whatever. And then you will give it a component to render. So when someone goes to a specific route, you're basically saying, hey, I want you to render this component. So actually I can just copy this. And I'm gonna put this outside of the nav bar because I want the nav bar to always be showing. All right, so we're gonna do, let's do routes and routes. So we have all the imports here. If you look at the route component, this is gonna be slash, but we need to give it a component to actually render. So you do that by giving it an element. We're basically saying if you go to slash, then render this component. And we want to render, we don't have one yet, so let's make one up. So let's go to navbar first, and we'll figure out what we want to do. So get rid of that. Okay, and we'll fix these A tags in a sec, but I'm just going to change this to, let's do contact about. Yeah. We'll have these 3 pages, basically. All right. So now I'm going to create a new, we could put it in components, but I'm going to create a new folder called pages. It's like a higher level category. And I'm going to create about JSX and users.jsx and contact. All right, so we'll start with the about page, and I'm going to create a new component. Do I have these snippets? No, I don't. Okay. I'm just going to return something simple. All right, so I have a page here. So now I'm going to go to my routes, go to app.js. And what I want is if someone goes to, we'll make this about, /about, they're going to get the about component. Auto import. Cool. So now if I go here to /about, let's see. Let me open up the dev tools here. Oh, I did that. Let's see here.
Is it your use state up there?
So this is being imported but not used, so that shouldn't be creating an actual error.
You have to do /app/about.
Oh, base name. Yeah, I didn't see that. Thank you. I'm gonna get rid of that. What happens when you copy paste stuff? Interesting. Export default. I'm returning something. Work. What if I just return it right here? So that does work. I lose this other. Might be like a CSS issue. Hmm. I'm a little confused now. It looks like it should be working for me. Why don't I take a 5-minute break and I'm gonna debug this real quick and then we'll come back. All right, so get rid of this. The problem was that I'm using the hash router. So there's browser router, which is the main one, and then hash router. And I'm using hash router in part because later on that's what we'll end up using because it's just easier to work with once we get this like in a container and deploy to AWS. But all the routes are prefixed with a hash. So instead of /about, it's /hash/about. So yeah, that was the problem. Okay, so we've got our router going, and we're gonna define a bunch of routes, and the nav bar is gonna have links to each of these. So the nav bar right now doesn't have any links to them, so I have to go manually do that. So how do we create a link? So we can't use an A tag because that's going to make an actual request. So there's another component that comes with basically a substitute for the A tag, and that is called link. And you can import that. So let me just look at that. Let's see. Link. So it's fairly simple. You just put a link component, and then the two will be like the href. So pretty straightforward. So I'm gonna import that, and then instead of this href blah blah blah, I'm gonna I guess we'll start with the about one. I'm gonna get rid of this. And we'll just do link. And then this will be about. Did see that right away, even though it's not going to do anything right now. And then we're going to add a 2. And this will be /about. I'm going to go back over here to the main page. And now when I hover over about, you can see it, and now it goes there. So contact still doesn't work, but okay. So that's pretty much it. So I went to a new page, I clicked the link and went to a new page, but I didn't actually request a new page from the server. This just rendered a different component. So you can implement the same thing for all of them. We've got users and contacts. Okay. If I go to contact, so I don't have those actual components. So go back here and look at the route. So I don't have those routes defined. So I'm going to now define those routes. We've got contact and users. We'll have to create these. We're going to go to the pages and we'll define these. So contact, copy the about one. Here. The dev tools.
I think your function names are all the same.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, as is the copy paste. And then I need to import them. Now if I click here, you can see all these. So I'm not making any network requests here. All right. So that's pretty much it. That's like the basics. So that's how React Router works. There's a whole bunch of other stuff, and I would suggest going through the tutorial. You can do obviously more sophisticated things, but this is the meat and potatoes. So I'm gonna add one more layer of complexity here. Let's say we want to go to /users/1 or /users/whatever. We can actually handle that here as well. So you can actually create kind of subroutes. So we can have a route that goes to /users, and we can have, let's do a subroute. So I'm going to push this one up real quick. There's a couple ways you could do this. I think this is probably the simplest one. So this path is going to be this now. We'll go Okay. So I think I don't have the slash here. There we go. So I can go to these routes as usual, but if I go to slash users slash 2 or whatever, this will take me here. So we're not doing anything with this information yet, but we can. So how would we, let's say we want to get this information and then use that to make a request somewhere else. We want to get information about user number 2. So I'm going to go to the users. I'll just do this in here, but you could also have other components. Actually, maybe I'll just do that. I'll create a new component. Called user. And then in users, components. And then I can render that here. And then I need to actually create this. I'll do this again. And then what I want to do here is I want to get that that extra part of the URL. So in this case, it's a number, an ID. So we can grab that using a hook. So I'm just going to look this up real quick. So React router DOM params. So there's this use params hook, which we can import. So I'm going to grab this. And then I'll define this here on user ID. Anyway, let's do this. So use params. And then this works kind of like state works. So if this changes, this will re-render and be available. So user ID. All right, so let's see if this works. I'm gonna go back to slash nothing. If I go to users, I'm getting let's see, what is that? Let's see, and then I think I have to get the actual, sorry. I think I have to get the actual user ID. So I'm going to call this params. I'll go back to users, uncomment this. Okay. We're going to slash user slash 2. Shows up there, user slash whatever. Okay. So it's a little bit of, magic. It's hook stuff. This comes, available to you. So use params is going to pick up whatever. So this is user ID. That's because we called this user ID right here. So this will be the variable name. As long as it's consistent, it can be whatever you want it to be. But that's how you grab information from the URL bar. Okay, let's actually use that, and we'll fetch a dummy user. So I think we'll go to some placeholder. User. Cool. All right. So if I want to use, I now want to make a request. So in this user component, I want to use this information to then make a fetch request to get some of this. How do I do that in React?
The use effect.
Yes, yeah. If you're making an API call, then use effect is your friend. So use effect, which I want to import. Okay, and async function fetch user info. And I'm going to default equals await fetch, and then I'll paste this in. And this will be /user/ and then whatever that user ID is. Okay. And then I'll finish this fetch request stuff. So const body equals await results JSON. Okay, and then I can do something with this body. So I'll console log it for now. Console.log body. Then I need to call fetch user info. Okay, so now I'm going to go here in the console and I'll get user 3, and I can see that this object exists here. All right, so now we'll actually use this information. So I'll get name and email.
So you're using the
Yeah.
router to hit an actual endpoint then.
Sorry, can you say it again?
You're using the router to hit an actual endpoint.
I'm not using the router to hit an endpoint. This has actually nothing to do with the router, except that I'm getting that URI from the router. So this is just normal React that has nothing to do with the router really. Actually, I'm gonna add this.
Where does use params come into play?
So use params is something you get from this React router DOM library they were using. And that's if you want to get information from the URL bar, basically. So here we're saying if you go to /users, then that's fine, but we actually care in this case which user ID someone selects. Actually, after we do this, we'll do a list page. It might make more sense if we show links.
Okay.
But we basically just want to get this piece of information. So how do we from our React code, how do we access this piece of information? And React Router DOM just makes it available using this use params hook.
Does it just get any of the changes? So like we're using like numbers for an ID, but if you went to like /A, is it still going to come up
It should.
as
Yeah, there's no typing here.
okay? But we would use like a link probably to like do like a to that ID or something so that the user's not like having to, I imagine
Yeah.
if they type in, then they're just gonna make another request.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's kind of what I was just saying, where it might be better. So after we get this, we'll go back and we'll create like a list view. So the users page will display a list of users, and then you can click on the link and go to the detail page. But yeah. So I'm gonna say this. This is the detail view for follow up. Okay, so as it is now, if we go /user/1, we get this stuff here, but I don't want it in the console. I want to actually display this here. So we use useEffects to get the information, but what do we do with that information?
Right now we're just console logging it. We could store it as state or something.
Okay, good. Yeah. So yeah. So I think the way to think about this is, does something on the page need to change? So we get this information. As a result of this information, is something going to change? If the answer is yes, then you need state. So state is for when something will change. So we're going to have state. So const user info set user info equals use state. Okay, so it's auto imported right here. So now once we get the information here, we'll just want to console log it, but we want to set user info and whoops. And what do we want to set this to? Well, maybe we can have some kind of object. We can have user name. Something like that. Email. And then from this, we're going to grab. So I think there's an email field and a name field. Yes. All right. So we're going to set this with the username will be body dot name, and then email will be body dot email. Okay, so I'm going to look at the actual state of the component. Oops. That's this. There we go. So we have state. So this is from user one, presumably the M grant. Okay, so we have this route that we can go to. And then in our code, we're going to pull this ID and we're going to make a fetch request somewhere to get data. We're going to use that to update state. So now we have the initial information we need to make that API request. Then we get back the information we want and we have it available. So now we want to render that. So we can do H2. The user info. So now we have that information. If we get a new user, get updated. Any questions about that?
Could you go back to the code real quick?
Yep.
Chad? Could you remind me what the params again mean? Okay, never mind. Let's use effect. So like it's only gonna run like the params at the end of the use effect function, I guess. The params in brackets. Yeah. So that's the how when it runs basically, I guess.
Yeah. So what is this? So use effects takes two parameters. One is this callback function, and the other one is this thing. So what does this thing control? Anyone
Doesn't
can.
it control like the routes?
Uh,
The
So
dependencies.
changes the user.
So when it executes.
yes. So you basically have three options for this. So this is the dependency array, and this kind of
Yeah.
what you put here will determine when and if this function runs. So if you don't put anything in here, it will run every time there is a change. So it will run on the initial render, and it will also run anytime anything changes, which is almost never what you actually want. That's how you get into like making infinite, having infinite re-renders, because you'll re-render, you'll change the state, which will trigger a re-render, which will change the state, which will trigger a re-render. So you have to pay attention to that. So if you have just an empty dependency array, then it will only run on the initial render. So if you want to do something just when the component initially renders, and that's it, then you use an empty array. If you put stuff in the array, this means you're going to run on the initial render and if anything in here changes. So if the params change, then we want to make another fetch request. That basically means, hey, they want a different user. So we need to fetch a different user.
Okay.
So if you have nothing here, I would take a look at your in your dev tools, because you're probably making like infinite requests or having infinite re-renders. That's something that like it's easy to do in React. Okay. All right. So we've got this use effect. Now we're getting the information that we want from the parameters, this slash whatever. And we're using that to get information about the user, which we're then saving in state. And anytime state changes, we get a re-render. So we will have whatever that current user's information is. Okay. So now what we're gonna do is, so we've been like having to manually enter this in, but obviously real users aren't gonna be doing that. So we're gonna create a list view, which will link to this detail view. All right, so let's, in here, we'll just put this, we'll put that right there. Yeah, so we'll do a little bit of rearranging, but for now I'm just gonna leave this in here. All right, so for the users page, we're gonna have to do something similar. So we're gonna have to go here and we're gonna get all of the users. We're gonna follow a very similar process. So we need information. So as soon as this component loads, we want to get all that information and render it. That means we're gonna use effect. We'll give it the callback. And then wait, that we're gonna get everything. Let's see, constant body equals await, result, oops. And then once we have that information, what do we do with it? Well, we want the page to be different. So that means we need some state. So let's bring in some state. What is the state going to be? It's going to be a list of users. So I'll just call it users. So users. I'll set it equal to an empty list. This will be a list. And then I'm just going to say set users. Now I need to actually call this function, set users. And then what do I put in this dependency array?
Just an empty list.
Yeah, I think just an empty list, because we really just need to get this information once when the thing loads. This. Okay, so now I should have all of this information available to me. So now here, what I want to render is not really this user anymore, but I want to render basically like a list of links. I'm going to create a new component called user link. Simpler, but I'll just create a new one. Okay, and I'm going to return, I think, just a link. I'm going to have to import that. Where would I have that? I'm going to import link from React Router DOM. And then the two. Well, so we have a question. So I'm gonna. So in users, we have to get all of this user information, which is going to be in let's see, console. Yeah, we can still see this. So this is one example. So it'll be a list of these. So for any one of them, we want to get information that we can use to create a link. And a link here, if you look at our application, it needs to be something that is going to hit one of these guys, specifically this one. So we need to grab this ID here. So if we need to get some information, well, let's also get the username. So we know that we're going to want to get ID and username. And the link to will be something ID, and it's going to be users/ID. And then what we'll show will be the username. Okay, so we know what this component needs. Now we have to give it to it. So from users, we want to create a bunch of these link components. So I'm going to create a function here. Okay, so user links is going to map over all of the users. So return users dot map. My computer is really struggling right now. And user. What are we gonna? Well, we want to create a user component. So actually, I think I don't even need multiple lines for this. So we need to import this user link. Import user link from, and that will be // user link. And then we're gonna put that in here. So we're gonna create that with the appropriate props. So user link. We're gonna pass in ID, which is going to be users dot ID. And then what's the other one? Okay, the computer is really struggling.
Username, I think.
Thank you. Oh, whoops. And then in here, we're just going to render user links. Okay, so I have to give it a key, and we'll just use the ID. Okay, So this is not very pretty. So let's fix this. User link. It's just the link, so I guess I'll just add a BR element maybe. Could definitely make this prettier, but for now it's fine. Maybe I can't use BR. BR is void, must have neither. Okay. All right, computer. Okay. So now we have a list of users, and if we look at the link, you should be able to see it highlighting user/1, user/2, user/3, etc. So if we click on one, so this goes to users/4. So we don't want that. Let me just remove this. Okay, so I think we're not actually rendering anything right now. But so the links work. So now we have to make some adjustments. Before we were rendering the user component inside here, but now we're gonna put it over here. So user ID will now render the let's see, user. So that's not a page, that is a component. All right, so let's see. All right, so we got the nav bar. We're going to about blah, blah, blah. If we go to /users, we see this now, this list of users that we're creating. It's going to create a bunch of user links, which should provide a link to the route that we want, which is /user/some number, which should then get picked up here. And it looks like it's not. So let me go into the dev tools here. So what happens if I manually go here?
Does it do anything different with a hashtag before the ID?
It should be like the route includes the hashtag.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it like prepended like another one or something.
No, it doesn't look like it's doing that. I mean, it's actually showing up correctly in the URL. I think there's probably something getting overridden here. Let's see. So go to users. All this looks correct. user link, navbar. So this is still, even when I go to a different route, this is still rendering. It's like this is overwriting something. So I'm guessing that there's like a regex issue, or because this is inside of this, somehow it's only picking up. So let's look at these params. That one. All right, so I'm gonna go look React router DOM, and then route path. I know there are some like, there used to be like a more like there's an exact path. Users, user ID. We tried doing something where I nest this. This one doesn't do anything. And then if it just goes to nothing. Okay, so let me copy this. Erase this. So I just want to see if this will change the order. Okay, so there's just some, this is all basically regex parsing at the end of the day. So so let's just make sure this works. Yeah, so you user /2, back to users, user /9. So yeah, I just played around with it. So if you go to /users, before it was kind of overriding, it was picking up on the pattern first, and so this more specific one just wasn't ever rendering. So I just rearranged it so the order, so it'll check first if there's an ID at the end, and if there is, then it'll render that. Otherwise, it'll fall down. So all this stuff is like sequential, basically. I think there's another way to do this, but yeah, again, in the older one, there was an exact path. I don't think that exists in the current version. And then, so that's so just for the sake of completeness, maybe we can create a link back to users. So in the detail view. So where are we? User. We'll just create a link. So I'm going to import that. I don't think we have. Import that here, link. And then I will create a link. To let's see if this works. I don't know if it's going to assume if we're already somewhere. I don't know if it's going to assume that, but we'll see if this works. So users. So yeah, so users /9/users. So maybe if I include this. Yeah. So if you include the backslash, it'll basically, it's like starting at the root. So this will work now. So if you don't include, if you don't prefix it with a slash, it'll be relative to wherever you are currently. If you include the slash, it'll be like an absolute path. Okay. Yeah, I'll just review that real quick, but that's pretty much it. So the short and sweet is you wrap everything that you want in a router, browser router, a hash router, and then whatever. So in this case, navbar, we want it to always render, so we put that outside of the routes, and then we just define these routes, which are going to be checked, one at a time, basically, using regex. And whatever route, we can have a corresponding component that will render. And then to do more refined stuff, you can include a colon with a variable name, an arbitrary variable name. And then in the component, you can use that if you use the use params hook, which comes from React Router DOM. Okay, any questions?
I guess I saw like messing with some of the tutorial. Like I think they have us delete app JSX completely, and then in the main JSX, like pretty much set up all of the routing.
Yeah.
Is that kind of like convention when you're using router for your page? Like eventually?
Yeah, I don't think it really matters that much. But yeah, I think it basically just depends on how you set it up. If in this case, yeah, I mean, we could go one level deeper, for example, and go into main here and just, yeah, again, remove that. And then, so there are a couple ways to do this. One is the tutorial, the way the tutorial shows you, you're basically, you're doing a lot of the stuff with configuration. So I think this is the way that I showed you, I think is the simplest way to do it. But yeah, the tutorial, let me see. What is this? As you do stuff like this. So you're basically writing configuration, you're kind of writing a description of everything you're doing there. So you, as it says here, you go into the root here, and then you basically wrap everything in a router, and this router is a description, like essentially a JSON object that describes your routes.
Okay, that makes sense. I just wasn't sure, like if yeah, if if once we have routing set up, if we should move stuff out of app or if it really matters. And it sounds like it's kind of up to us.
Yeah, I don't think it really matters. But so this way that they're telling you, I'd say that this is like the most professional way of doing it. But it's, you know, it's slightly more complicated. So yeah, so I showed you this way, which I think is the simplest way. But you know, you can also use the tutorial. So you have both. You can look at both, and you can decide what's best. But yeah, I would suggest working through this tutorial if you haven't already done that.